here we go with part 2 of restoring this old Grizzly Jointer, and we're going to do a complete restoration, and we're going to get into part 2 and all the destruction here and how it's going to come. Coming up. I'm Roger and welcome to the shop, and laying here in front of me are all the parts and pieces from this Grizzly Jointer that I recently picked up on a super good deal, and it needs some work. Got a lot of rust on it, what I affectionately like to call metal mites, but we're going to get all that removed. Going to take care of the, actually I'm going to repaint it. Decided to do that. I had a little bit of a struggle getting this apart, as the cast channels where the gibs ride and the tables slide for your adjustments up and down, there was a lot of rust and corrosion in there, and I had to doing a lot of work with a dead blow hammer to finally get the thing apart. Had some rusted bolts, but nothing broke, so fortunately. Okay, we're going to do a close-up with a little handheld camera, and you can kind of see what all's going on with all this stuff. Okay, so got it tore down, and I do mean tore down. I think I mentioned I was going to completely restore this, so I've got it torn completely down. Kind of an overview of all the little parts and pieces here. And I did find out that, at least date-wise, the motor was made in 1989, so I'm assuming that this is 1989, 1990 vintage. The cutter head needs some attention. Of course, the knives are dull. The bearings seem to be plenty free and everything, but I'll be completely cleaning everything up. I had quite a time getting these tables off here. The slides where the gibs were rusted pretty bad. A lot of use of the dead blow hammer to finally get those to break loose and get them off. So I'll be doing a little sandblasting and a lot of sanding and a lot of painting, and then I'll be getting into some of the reassembly on this. I'm going to head off to a store and see if I can find some kind of paint close in color to this. I like to try to keep it sort of original. The mounting plate right here is rusted pretty bad, but it's mostly just surface rust. I think that'll clean up just fine. Everything else here, this is just surface rust. It'll clean up. The base will need some work. A lot of corrosion and stuff in there. I need to clean up all the handles, need to clean up the fence, so yeah, everything's going to get rebuilt here. Okay, so today I went and got a few things I needed. A little abrasive blaster, which I'm going to, Harbor Freight thing, I'll do a review on that, and found out my jitterbug sander that I bought way back in the probably 1972 or 73, Buffalo brand. Made it, even back then it was made in China, but the trigger on the top, which turns the air on and off, is just completely shot, and obviously you can't get parts for it. So while I was at Harbor Freight getting the abrasive and the blaster, because I needed something just low cost, I picked one of those up too, and I probably even do a little review on that. Not something I use a whole lot, but every once in a while you need one. And you know, I've got all these random orbitals, but when you get into wet sanding, you don't want to be using electric stuff. That, and it'll ruin the vacuum ports on it. So the other thing I did was, oh, this is the belt guard. Well, we want to get some paint. Match this. Well, that's not as easy as it sounds. I went to a couple different places to try to get Rust-Oleum, which is what I want to use on this, where they could mix and do color match, but nobody around here has a computer that will do this, scan the color and match, and because it's so alligatored and there's so much rust in it, they said it probably wouldn't work anyway. So the next option was to go to one of the automotive stores where they sell paint and such, and done this before. I thought, well, okay, if I'll just get some cheap enamel. They can scan this and match it. Well, I got the same answer, that it's not going to scan very well. I said, well, it doesn't have to be an exact match, just something kind of close. Well, they could do that, but the enamel was $80 a quart. I said, well, let me think about that. So what are we going to do? $10 a quart. Rust-Oleum John Deere green. And it's not like I can't use it because I've got 2 John Deere tractors. And something always needs touching up. So we're going to be using Rust-Oleum John Deere green on here. It's a little darker, a little different, but it's kind of keeping with the same theme. The other thing I did was, if you saw in part 1, I had no idea where to find the model number of this. And I still never did. But I got on one of the forums I belong to on Facebook and posted a picture of the jointer. And hey, any of you guys got one of these? Maybe tell me what model it is, because I really had no idea. Had several people tell me it was a G1182. So I went on the Grizzly's website and downloaded the, well, it says here instruction manual, and I also downloaded the parts list. But because of what I did today, it's the destruction manual, because I took this thing completely apart. And while I was at it, I discovered on the motor is a date code. This was made in 1989, or at least the motor was. So that tells me that the jointer was either made in probably 89 or 90. So it's got a few years on it. But I've got a lot of cleanup to do before I can even think about starting to paint. And one of the other things I wanted to do, this is one of the side panels here. I'm going to be building a base on this, for this, out of wood, with some casters on it that lock so I can move this thing around because of my small shop situation. There's no real good place to run screws down through this. And granted, the thing's heavy and it'll just sit there, but I don't want the possibility of it getting knocked off. So I'm going to weld a piece of 2-inch angle iron here in the bottom after I straighten out all this bent metal and clean the rust off. And that's what I'll be using when I bolt this down to the base. Okay, for that, that's where we're at so far. So I'll get some stuff cleaned up and we'll see how it looks after it gets cleaned up. So here we are on this jointer, and I've got most of the parts sandblasted. Actually came out pretty good. Had to suddenly stop as I was doing this last night as it was starting to rain, and I certainly didn't want my freshly sandblasted stuff to get wet. The surfaces of the jointer table, I'll be refinishing those separate. I did give them a light blasting to get the surface rust off, but I'll be doing some oil sanding on that to get it down nice and flat and shiny and polished up and all that kind of good stuff. My next step, of course, is going to be sandblasting the rest of this, and I'm actually going to take the motor apart and get it all cleaned up. And if you've never taken an electric motor apart before and you don't know what you're doing, don't do it, because you may have parts laying around that you don't know where they're going to go back to. Being an electrician, I've had a lot of motors apart. I know how they work. I know how they go back together. So I'm going to take this apart. It is a totally enclosed fan cooled, but I can see looking through the vents that the fan's pretty dirty. So I'm going to take it apart and inspect it. Check the cap on top, make sure we don't have any corrosion on the connections. Make sure all the connections are good. Put a new cord on it and paint it, of course. Well, my next step here will be to, once I get everything else sandblasted, is to get everything laid out, cleaned up. Some of the metal has well, got some dents and dings and bends, and we'll get all that straightened out, a little bit of minor body work. Then I'm going to shoot a coat of primer on it and hopefully get some things painted. Oh, and I do need to take my steel angle and get welded onto the bottom of this so I have a good way to mount this when I get everything reassembled. So, time to take a break. So here's the guard. Shot it with a couple coats of self-etching primer after I vigorously sanded this. I was trying to get the casting a little bit smoothed out. It's a very rough casting. There's a lot of pits in it. I finally gave up trying to get down through the pits. But after the self-etching primer, put 3 coats of paint on it. And of course, since we're painting the machine John Deere green, I might as well make the guard John Deere yellow. And right back here is the motor. Got it all painted up, and I'll let that dry over the weekend. Then start attacking some of the other parts. Okay, I've got this sandblasted and the lower part of the stand just roughly assembled here. Now I understand why there were so many screws missing. There's a whole lot of things that don't line up. Things that got, over the years, that got a little twisted and warped. In fact, I got a clamp on there now just trying to get the bottom screws in.
but we'll get that figured out. Well, as I said, everything's sandblasted. I got a lot of the stuff taped off over here on the surfaces that I want to get into paint on when I get ready to paint. But I want to make the base for this. This is obviously upside down right now. And I did this so I could straighten out the metal on the top up here. And I've got that more or less straightened out. I've got a good measurement of 12 by 17. So I've got some square steel tube I'm going to make a frame out of. And I'll weld it together and mount that inside there. Yeah, I got my pieces cut and the angles on them, and I got the bevels on it and everything mill scale ground off, and ready to weld it. I was kind of hoping that it would cool off. There's some storms coming, and hopefully they won't get too severe, and that's supposed to drop the humidity, because right now the humidity is about 96% and it's about 92 degrees, so it's just absolutely miserable out here. I don't feel like putting a jacket and a hood on right now. But I'm going to start tacking in this corner, and then we'll square it up as I go. And once I get it all tacked and squared, I'll weld it up. So just about when you really get into doing something, you got most of this welded up, but we got something coming here. Okay, you're probably going to hear a lot of background noise because we're getting that new roof put on after the Derecho storm. But took some time here to take this cutter head apart, and it was quite the challenge. The first thing I need to do is actually find a smaller, or I should say a thinner, 12mm wrench, more like that of a tapper wrench, because I could barely get this in there to get some Gibbs screws. And then they were really rusted in there. You can kind of see here how much rust I've got. I got a lot of cleanup to do on this before I can actually even come close to painting. And I'm not going to disassemble it, I'm just going to clean it up. The bearings appear to be in good shape, there's nothing hanging up on it. I'll just get this all cleaned up and mask off the areas I don't want paint on, and probably paint it as a unit. But once again, after I get it cleaned up, it's going to be a chore. Okay, so here's where we're at with this after this Derecho storm. And if you don't know what a Derecho is, if you're from the south or the eastern seaboard, you know what a hurricane is. A derecho is a land-based hurricane without an eye. And we had one here Monday, and there's parts of this video earlier where I was taking cover from the storm, and that's what we had. And you're probably hearing some noise in the background. We're getting a new roof on the house, we're getting a roof on the shop, on the sheds. A lot of damage here, 100-mile-an-hour winds, and not just gusts, but in a derecho, those winds are sustained, just like they are in a hurricane. And we're in Illinois in the Midwest, but it happens every so often. The last one was in 2008, and it did a lot of damage then, and we just had one this past Monday, and it did a lot of damage too. Anyway, back to the jointer here. Was able to get everything primed. Going to be painting it here shortly. And I'm also thinking about the electrical on it. So how am I going to control this? On the newer jointers, you'll notice that there's a pedestal up on the side where the switch is no longer underneath. It's up there right where you can put your hand on it. Start, stop is right there. I'm making one of those, and I'll go into detail on that here a little bit later on how I'm making it. And I'm using a magnetic switch. Of course, this is only rated for 1/2 horse. So I have a 1-horse motor. That's still not a problem. The advantage of a magnetic switch is, let's say you're using your jointer and the power goes out. Okay, if you have a conventional switch, when the power comes back on, so will the jointer. That's not a good thing if you're not there or you happen to have left something laying on it. So what this does in a magnetic start-stop circuit, if you lose power, it does not automatically start again. And that's what we're doing here. So, 1/2 horse, not rated for 1 horse, not a problem. What I'm going to do is use this to operate the coil on a magnetic starter. Right here, this will also offer me motor protection because I can dial my amperage on the motor, which is like 13 amps. I can set this dial here to protect it to 13 amps, so if it overloads, this will trip, won't harm the motor. Yes, I know it's 3-phase, but I already had it, I didn't have to buy it. I've got a whole bunch of these left over from back when I was working in the trade, So might as well put them to use. One other thing I'm adding is on the front, towards the left side, which is at about knee height, is another stop. So let's say you're joining something and you've gone by where you can easily reach that pedestal over there. So I'll be able to hit this button right here with my knee and stop it instantly. That's the point of this, and I made a hole in the front, and I'll wire that in series with the stop circuit on this. And I'm not going to get into great details because I'm not going to start trying to train people to be an electrician or a controls electrician, but I will kind of go over a simple diagram of this, and if you are not sure of what you're doing, then don't do it. Have an electrician do it. This is not some place you want to mess around. Not only could you get shocked or worse electrocuted, you could have the system not work properly and you put yourself in danger. Okay, to house this starter right here, once again, I've got a bunch of stuff left over from when I was in the trade. So I'm going to be mounting this box to the side of the jointer on the right hand side, underneath about where the old switch used to be. And yeah, there's stuff in here yet. This is an old tear out. I'll be remodeling this, and I'll be mounting the starter in here, and I might even add an auxiliary circuit since I've got extra poles on this starter for dust collector. I don't have a central dust collector here. I use this Rockford dust right over here with a vac on it. What I'll be able to do is plug it into a receptacle I'll probably put on this box, and whenever the jointer starts, the vac and the dust collector will start. So that's where we are so far. So got to get the gibs and everything cleaned up. As you saw there, they were badly rusted, and hopefully if the roofers leave early enough and I've got enough daylight, I want to put the top coat on my parts here. I've got everything primed. Of course, the top is taped off. Got everything primed. I did that last night after the roofers left. So if weather cooperates and the roofers don't stay too late tonight, I will get the top coat on it. So more to come. Okay, something I've added to this, I've got the base cabinet assembled and primed, of course. I added a dust collector port to the end. This was available from Grizzly, and it was not very expensive. It was, I don't know, $5 or something. And what I did was, for the mounting screws, I used the existing holes and screws that actually hold the chute inside. And then here over here on the front, I mentioned that emergency stop. Right there is the hole I've cut for that. And yeah, I've got a punch and all, the keyway punch and all that stuff for that, because like I said, I used to do this for a living. Okay, the pedestal is going to mount on the back side, and if you look towards the inside there, you'll see I've got a few holes drilled, 3 of them actually. And what that is going to do is support this yellow piece of, this is called unistrut. I've got that hanging from a wire. I've painted it yellow. And I'll be mounting on the front of that this box right here, which if you happen to be an electrician, that's called an FS box. Be mounting that, and then the wiring will be running down to my control panel, which I'll be in the process of building. Okay, I'm going to explain a little bit here about this this magnetic switch and how it works and how you wire it up. When you get this, it does not come with instructions, so unless you know what you're doing, you're not going to have a clue what to do with this. These are spade connections in the back. They're male, so the connectors you will need to get will need to be female. They, like I have crimped on here, they do not need to be 90 degree. I just happen to have a bunch of them, so decided to use that to connect this. The bottom 2 are your line in. So you've got L1 and L2, or to make it very simple, black and white. The 2 upper ones are your outgoing. And you need to follow suit. Don't put your black and white over here because that's dead short. So you want L1 here, L2 there, or black and white. Do the same thing on your load going out to your motor, or in this case my starter. And I call it, we in the trade call this T, that is the load. So you got T1 and T2, or black and white. So if you have black here coming in, you want black there going out, white coming in here, white there going out. Another thing, this does not come with a box. It does not come with mounting screws. It's just this switch in a bag. And there is a little diagram on here, on the side right here. And if you're able to read the European nomenclature, I am very familiar with it. It will explain everything that's going on here. But if you don't know how to read the European IEC standard and you're used to NEMA, or you don't understand the stuff at all, this isn't going to make any sense to you. So just remember, as the switch is upright like this, and you turn it around to the back, your line comes in the bottom. That is your line cord that you plug into the wall. Black, white. This is going out to your motor or your load. Black, white. If you hook it up any other way, it's not going to work. It's got to be this way. And of course, this is, we got some weird colors going on here. This is a piece of control cable. And my control circuit here, because I'm using a magnetic starter in conjunction with this, is fused at 1 amp. So this can be light gauge wire. This is 16 gauge wire here. But here I'm using L1. And my red here I'm using for L2. This is black, red, blue, orange. So there's my L2. And you want to make sure these fit good and tight. If you can just slip them on, you got something going on that's wrong. Alright, so T1, I'm using a blue here for that. That goes right above your L1. And T2, which I'm using orange for that, but you would be using white probably, goes above your L2. That's all there is to it. And of course there is a ground in here, and it's already bonded to the bottom. Then you just put everything in here and put some screws in it. Now I'll get into more detail on how this pedestal is built when I go to put it on the jointer itself. But this box up here is what's called an FS box. You don't need to be that exotic. You could use definitely use a weatherproof box. Don't use just some indoor handy box or something that's got knockouts in it, let dust and everything in. This is sealed. In the bottom here, this is a cord grip, commonly called a CGB by us in the trade. And then my control cable comes out and is fastened to this piece of unistrut with tie wraps. And that will pass through a grommet into the inside of the case. But, okay, I'll get the rest of this put together and we'll move on to the next part. Okay, well here's something a little bit interesting. One of the other things I'm doing is replacing this cord here. 1989 vintage, and because I'm changing the way that this is controlled, I need a little bit longer cord on it anyway. But I took the motor cover off and found a couple things. There's actually a wiring diagram inside if you need one. This could also be hooked up for 240 volt operation. I'm going to keep it at 120 volt. But when I took this cover off here, I noticed that somebody never hooked up the ground wire. It was just hanging in there. So that's not the right way to do it. It needs to be actually connected usually to one of these frame screws, and I'll be doing that when I replace the cord. Okay, got this cleaned up here, and got a new cord. It's a little heavier than the one that came off of there. This is a 14 gauge. The one I took off with it looked like it was about an 18. If you've never seen a connector, cord grip connector like this before, you put your cord through it, then there's a nylon nut that goes on the inside of the motor, and after you get everything connected, there's this little screw right here on the side. Just tighten the screw up, it pushes against that cord and it locks it in place. It's nice to leave it loose while you're actually hooking things up, so you got a little bit of wire to work with. Don't lose your little screw. You don't want a whole ton of wire inside the motor junction box. And that nut appears to be stripped. That nut is stripped. No wonder it came out so easy before. Okay, found one. Actually, it was the one that came off of the other end off the old switch box. And it was okay, so got that one in here. This time we're going to have the ground hooked up. That one needs a crimp, the other ones are just going to get wire nuts. Little tip, if you've never done this, always make sure you twist your wires together before you put the wire nut on. I know some people think you don't need to do that, but it makes a big difference. Another little tip is after you put your wire nut on, pull on the wires. If they pull out, you didn't do it right. It's a good way to check now instead of having to try to find that out later. So we'll put the ground right here. And you fold your wires back, put the cover back on, and try to figure out what you did with the screw. There it is. And the last step is to put that little grip screw back in there. Okay, well, the next thing I want to explain a little bit for those that are curious about exactly how I'm working these controls, because it is somewhat complex if you're not an electrician or not familiar with this type of thing. Like I said, this here is a magnet, what they call a magnetic starter, and yes, it is three-phase, and no, I don't need one that big, but I have several of these around, and the overload unit on it is the right size for what I need. Of course, I'm only using one pole of it, but it'll work just fine that way. And right here is a little fuse holder. I have a 1 amp fuse in it. That's for the control circuit. That's going up to the pedestal, and it's going over to the emergency stop, and it'll come back and go to the, well, it's right here, under the starter coil. What this hole is for here is, and this will make more sense once we get the stand put together and I get this mounted on it. This is where the motor lead will come through. The control wires also are coming through the back of the panel, but because they're small diameter, this back plate sits on standoffs about this big, and the wires will just pass behind it and around the side, and then they'll make up on these terminal blocks here. The line cord will come into the bottom, and this one over here will be the neutral, and this one right here will be the hot. And from there, everything goes on controls, and like I said, once I get this all hooked up, and I'll actually make a diagram. I don't normally do diagrams for this, I just do it. But I'll make a diagram for those that may want to do something like this. Once again though, if you are not comfortable with this or you don't understand it, don't be trying to do it. I have an electrician do it. You can get yourself hurt, shocked, or get yourself killed, or even worse, get somebody else killed. So don't be screwing with this if you don't know what you're doing. That's just a little bit of explanation on how the control panel works on here. Okay, so I don't want this video to get too long here on part 2, so we're going to wrap up part 2 here. This, of course, is the electrical box, and there's the grommets I was talking about, and where the motor lead passes through in the back. And of course, here's the stand. I've got a hole punch here for that other emergency stop. I got the holes drilled over here for mount the box. We got the holes drilled in the back for the pedestal. Hopefully the roofers will be done here soon, and I'll be able to open some doors up and do some painting. But otherwise, stay tuned for part 3, or get into putting the finish coat on this and start to put this whole thing back together. I didn't plan on this taking this long to do, but with the storms we've had and everything that's come up, yeah, it's taken way longer than I thought. At any rate, appreciate you watching. I hope you're interested in this type of thing. And of course, we're always looking for subscribers, and naturally we want to get that thumbs up. It always helps the channel. Otherwise, I'm Roger in part of the shop. See you in the next one.